Have you ever felt stuck? Stuck in a sense of like you feel like you're in a box, right? Like life is moving, going along, doing its normal thing, but you feel like your head's in the clouds, right? And sometimes you don't even realize that you're stuck. You're just going through the movements of like the daily life. Then this video is for you. What I'm going to show you and what I'm going to share with you is a couple ways. For one, that you can, really recognize and be aware if you are stuck, right? And then the reasons why that you might be stuck, and then how to really start releasing yourself. That way you can start moving forward and start, enjoying life and, doing everything that you want. I'm going to share a story with you that that you might resonate with. So a while ago, I built the business with my brother, and we grew the business pretty fast, and he was the face of the company, right? So what I did was I was the operations guy, I was a finance guy, I was a marketing guy, and he was the sales guy, right? All companies kind of have all those parts, right? So everyone knew who he was, right? And then, unfortunately, one day, I got to see him for the last day, and he was in a motorcycle accident, and he passed away. Right. And then what I was forced to do is become the face of the company, right? Nobody knew who I was. And it was devastating, right? Because, when I got that call, from his wife, it was one of the hardest things that I had to overcome and to really accept that, that for one, he was gone, but now, I was in charge of a company of like 30 or more employees. I had to take care of his family. So I was kind of thrown upon, these responsibilities, right? And when I was going through those motions of taking care of the business, taking care of his family, and all these other things, all these legal matters that started popping up, what I didn't realize at the time is that as with that event, I had my head in the clouds, right? I was kind of stuck like in a box, and I was forced to it. And then after everything somewhat settled down, I still was in that box, right? Like all the events, kind of somewhat, kind of calmed down a little bit. There were other things that came up, but then I fell into this deep depression, right? I felt alone. I felt, like I had no idea what I was doing, right? And all that, what I realized was it was all these emotions, right, that were thrown upon me through this event of my brother's passing, and it put me in a box, right? Because I was thrown into it, and I literally felt like I couldn't move, right? And this over time, things happened, and this box kept getting filled up, and what it felt like was like sand, right? So if you can imagine, like like a fishbowl, right? And then I'm inside that fishbowl, right? And then people just or events keep pouring sand on it, and I'm just sitting there, and the more things happen, the more time goes along that I don't realize that I'm kind of stuck, the more stuck I get, the less I can move, right? Because I'm just going through the emotions. My head is in the clouds. I don't realize what's going on. And there's more sand being poured around me in this fishbowl, and I'm moving less and less, right? And then at one point, I remember to this day that I got up and my wife was sitting next to me, and I got up, got ready to work, right? It was a pretty big company, so, I had to wake up like at 6 a.m. And I got up, and then I looked at her, and she had tears in her eyes, right? And at that moment, I couldn't breathe. It was like the sand was literally choking me. It was up to my neck, right? And it was coming up that quick, came up, and I just felt like I was just right at the borderline of being suffocated, right? Like by all this sand, right? And her tears and that pain I saw in her eyes made me kind of like wake up a little bit, right? And it made me realize that and this was probably, like a month and a half to 2 months, that I was just stuck. My head was in the clouds, right? I couldn't see what was in front of me. And the pain that I saw in her eyes gave me compassion, right? And that compassion allowed me to wake me up a little bit, right? And then after that, I went to work, and then I started realizing all these different, really strong emotions throughout my body. And then that started allowing me to kind of wake up a little bit, right? However, I still wasn't out of it, right? Like I was still, I felt like I had chains, right? Like I was still in this fishbowl surrounded by sand. I was able to move a little bit, but I still felt stuck, right? Like in the fishbowl. What allowed me to actually kind of, start coming out of it. First, it was that realization, that awareness, like that one event of looking at my wife's eyes and seeing just, like the tears coming out of her eyes and having that compassion for her and seeing her sadness for me. That was one. But that was step one. That's awareness. So you really need to be able to aware if you feel stuck, right? You have to recognize it first, right? And then the next thing was, my childhood, growing up, we really, didn't talk about our feelings, right? Like talk about your emotions. That just wasn't a thing, right? We just kind of just said we were just, either happy and that was it. Now, as a kid, I always held my emotions even more, right? I always, held them. I didn't explain them. I really didn't know what they were. I just kind of contained them, right? So with this event, me being in the head of my clouds, I didn't know how to feel my emotions, what they were, right? And what I ended up doing that really was, what really saved me is, someone told me that I should seek therapy or counseling. I had no idea what that was because I was like, man, only, people like we don't go to therapy. Like that's not something that I grew up, doing. And then I asked a question to the person, and he was a really good friend. Is like, hey, have you ever gone to therapy? Like, what's that? And he told me, he says, man, he says, I've been going to therapy for years, right? And he told me, like, that's the only way that you're able to snap out of it, right? Like, and literally, you have to snap out of being stuck. And so, if you feel stuck, right? And you feel like life is just moving along, if you feel like you're in that fishbowl and you're like got sand up to here and you can only move a little bit, then one of the things that you need to do is first be aware of it, right? And then two is, you need an objective advice from the outside. And that might talking to somebody else, right? It might be therapy, for you. It might be talking to a friend. But what I realized when I was stuck in that moment, in that fishbowl full of sand, was that I was in my head, right? My head was in the clouds. So the only conversations that I was having throughout the day, through those like 2 months, was just with myself and my thoughts, right? Now, that is a place that you don't want to be because your conversations in your head, your thoughts, they're going to want to seek comfort, right? And you're already in pain because you're stuck for some emotional reason, and it's going to keep you there. It's going to keep you there because what you're trying to do is ask why, right? Like, why am I here? Why did I experience this? Like for me, it was, like, why did my brother die, right? Like, why, couldn't he, he was in a motorcycle, right? Like, what were the chances, right? Like, why did it have to happen to him? And then all of a sudden, I started like, why did it happen? Start happening to me? And what that creates, when you start asking the question why internally, it actually creates like a victim mentality, right? And what that means is that you're going to get stuck there, right? And you ask yourself why, and your brain will give you more reasons, right? And more reasons. And it just like adds and compounds over and over to it. And that's why you get stuck. Because we're asking somewhat the wrong question and we're inside our head. Our head is literally in our clouds, right? So instead of asking why, if you realize that you're stuck, what you want to do is start asking, what can you learn from this event, right? What can you do? Or like, how do you, get unstuck, right? Ask yourself different questions, but just be really aware of if you're asking yourself why, that's only going to further deepen you and pour more sand into that fishbowl, and you're going to move even less, right? And the whole idea here is to be able to somewhat snap you out of it. And what snaps you out of it when you're mentally stuck, like emotionally stuck, is to ask logical questions, right? Because you got really two sides. You got your emotional side and then you got your logical side, right? So you need some sort of logical challenging event or question to kind of snap that emotion out of it, right? So that's one that you can do by yourself. But on the second side is you want to talk to somebody else, talk to a significant other, talk to a friend. One of the things that I learned that can be challenging is to talk to your own family, because a lot of the times the beliefs that hold us in that stuck mode, like in that fishbowl, right? That sand. The sand is actually, those beliefs come from our family, right? So they might have something similar, and they're somewhat biased because your family, obviously, they care for you, they have emotions for you. So they might not be able to really give you a outside perspective of your situation to help you move forward. So, for me, it was, speaking to someone outside of me, right? To my friend that told me, hey, therapy, can help. And then once I talked to my therapist, and, obviously he enlightened me with a few things that, he actually, what he told me that really snapped me out of it was, well, first, when I went, and I kind of explained this, when I went to therapy, I didn't know what to expect, right? Like it was like, what in the world? Like, what's going on? I just released. As soon as we closed the door, I just like cried for like probably 20 minutes. I had no idea why. Never had done that before. But looking back at it, that was a release, right? A release of all those trapped emotions of the event of my brother passing and me being thrown upon taking charge of this company and all these other things that I had to do. But I never had time to release, right? So when you're stuck, one of the very first things that you would definitely want to be aware of is to release those emotions, right? You might not know what it is, but that's very important. So there I am sitting at this therapist office. This guy I'd never met before, right? I just talked to him on the phone. Back then it was just the Yellow Pages. Found him, right? And then went to him. And I'm there crying and just crying, and it just came out, right? And then later, once all he gave me was tissues, and I took them. And after I released all this, then he started asking me some questions, and he asked me, what has happened? How, can I, move forward from this? And then one thing that really told me was there's things that you can control and things that you can't. And that didn't even process with me, right? Because I was so still involved in the emotion. It was just like, I was still stuck in the essence of why me, right? Because I wanted to control. Again, the victim mentality, sometimes when you ask why, you get locked into that, and it's about control, because you want to stay in that, right? It's you can't really move. You're still in that sand, but it's control, right? So, but what he told me, there's things that you can control. There's things you can't. Anything outside of you cannot control. The only thing you can control is the way I was responding to the situation. I can understand my emotions. I can start releasing them. I can start talking about them, right? The only thing I can control is myself. And that was very new for me at the time, but that was really the release, right? Of me understanding that, hey, there's things I cannot control, right? That my brother passed away, that I had all these other issues, legal matters with the company. The only thing I can control is what I can do in the present moment. And that really shifted me into this whole journey that I'm at. But, so if you are currently stuck, what I want you to realize first is to find out if you are aware, if you feel like you're in a fishbowl full of sand and you can't hardly move. And then second is find out if you can be able to release it somehow. Either you can start asking a different question, right? Instead of asking yourself, why did this happen? Because usually we get stuck because of some sort of event. Sometimes you don't even realize what that event was. So instead of asking yourself why, you want to ask yourself, how can you get out of it? What can you learn from it? Is really important. Or just seek advice from someone else, right? So it's very important. So if you're feeling stuck, first step is to become aware of it, right? And then either start releasing whatever those emotions are, because that's really what it is. Your head's in the clouds. You can't see. And then you want to release that control of that event, of those things that happen to you, and just really start understanding yourself on how to be able to, speak to somebody, really start releasing those emotions. So hopefully this helped, and please leave a comment down below if you have, any questions or, any feedback. I would love it. This is going to be the first video of many more of this. And I hope you enjoy it. Make sure you subscribe to the channel to get tuned up if you want to see more of my videos. Take care.